when a lonely billionaire watches a humble waitress cradle his disabled son with pure love. One small act of kindness sparks a bond that changes all of their lives forever. A billionaire sat quietly at the corner of a small diner, a place far removed from the glittering world he usually lived in. His life was made of glass towers, luxury cars, endless meetings, and people who spoke to him only with respect or fear. But today, he wasn't here as the powerful man everyone knew. Today he was simply a father, carrying a weight that even all his money could not lift. Beside him was his young son, fragile and quiet in his wheelchair. Eyes wandering around the busy room without saying a word, the boy had been born with a disability that limited his movements and speech. For years, doctors and therapists had given advice, but nothing had brought the kind of joy the father longed to see in his child's face. He had provided the best hospitals, the best schools, and the best equipment money could buy. Yet no amount of wealth had filled the emptiness he felt whenever he saw his son's lonely eyes as they entered the diner. People glanced quickly, some with sympathy, others with discomfort. Before turning their faces away, the father noticed it, just as he always did. It hurt him every time. He was used to the world bowing before him, but with his son, it was different. Strangers avoided them not because of his power, but because of the boy's condition. The billionaire often wondered if his son felt this rejection too. Even if he never spoke about it, he placed the boy gently at their table, adjusting his wheelchair and smoothing the blanket that covered his legs. The diner smelled of fresh coffee and buttered toast, a smell that reminded the father of simpler times, long before success had taken over his life. He was tired, his face drawn from long nights at the office and endless negotiations. But here, in this small corner, he wanted only one thing: a few moments of peace with his child. A young waitress approached their table, her smile bright despite the exhaustion in her eyes. She carried the weight of long hours and low wages, yet there was a warmth in her that seemed untouched by hardship. "Good morning," she said cheerfully, her voice soft and kind. She bent slightly so she could see the boy, not just the father. "And good morning to you, young man," she added, as though the boy was her most important customer. The father watched silently. He was used to people directing their attention to him, always him, the billionaire. Yet here was someone who ignored his wealth, his reputation, and looked instead at the boy who so often went unnoticed. The waitress crouched down, her smile never fading, and spoke gently to the child. She asked him if he liked pancakes, if he wanted extra syrup, if he was excited for breakfast. The boy stared at her, his lips twitching as though trying to respond. For the first time in weeks, a tiny giggle escaped him. That sound hit the father's heart like a wave. He hadn't heard his son laugh in so long. He sat still, almost afraid to breathe, in case the moment disappeared. The waitress laughed softly too, not at him but with him, her voice full of acceptance. Then, without hesitation, she carefully asked if she could hold him for a moment. The father hesitated, surprised, but something in her eyes told him she meant no harm. She lifted the boy gently from his chair, supporting him with the kind of care that only someone truly compassionate could give. The boy rested in her arms, his small hands tugging at the pen in her pocket, his head leaning against her shoulder. She swayed slightly, humming a tune under her breath, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. The diner continued buzzing with activity, plates clattering, coffee being poured. But for the father, the world had gone quiet. All he could see was his son's smile, wide, bright, and alive. He felt something stir inside him, something he had not felt in years. He was a man who measured life in profits and losses, in contracts and deals. Yet in that simple moment, watching a stranger cradle his child with such tenderness, he realized he was witnessing something money could never buy. This was not pity. This was not obligation. This was genuine care, the kind that made his son laugh freely, without fear or hesitation. He leaned back in his seat, his eyes fixed on them. His son's fingers played with the waitress's necklace as she continued humming, and the boy's laughter filled the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. The father's chest tightened, not from pain, but from a deep, overwhelming emotion he struggled to name. The waitress looked up briefly and smiled at him. Not the polished smile people usually gave him when they recognized who he was, but a simple smile, human to human. She did not see a billionaire. She did not see power. She saw only a father and his child, and in that moment, as he watched the scene unfold, the billionaire realized something that shook him more than any business decision ever had. This woman, this ordinary waitress in a small diner, had given his son a gift he could not. She had given him joy. The father sat still in the diner booth, his hands wrapped around the edge of his coffee cup, though he had long forgotten to drink it. His eyes were fixed on the sight before him, his son cradled in the arms of a woman he had only just met. The waitress moved with such ease, her voice flowing gently like a soft song, as though she had known the boy her whole life. The billionaire felt something unusual stirring inside him. For years, he had hidden his emotions behind a wall of pride and control. But now that wall was beginning to crack. He studied her carefully, every small detail. She was young, but her face carried lines of struggle, the kind that came not from age but from responsibility. Her hair was tied back loosely, a few strands falling around her face as she bent toward the boy. Her uniform was slightly worn, her shoes clearly tired from hours of standing. But her smile glowed with a light that no exhaustion could dim. It wasn't polished or rehearsed, it was real. The father had grown used to people treating his son with pity. Some would force a smile, but their eyes revealed discomfort. Others avoided looking at him altogether, pretending not to notice. This waitress was different. She treated him not as someone to be pitied, but as someone to be loved, someone who deserved attention and laughter. She lifted him higher, making silly faces, whispering little jokes. The boy responded with a sound the father hadn't heard in so long, soft laughter. Bubbling up like a secret treasure, the billionaire's chest tightened. He was a man who controlled everything, his company, his employees, even his time down to the last minute. Yet here he sat, powerless, watching his son connect with a stranger in a way he never had with anyone else. And strangely, instead of discomfort, he felt wonder. The diner was busy that morning. Plates clinked, the smell of fried eggs and bacon filled the air, and voices rose and fell around them. But to the father, everything blurred into the background. His entire world narrowed down to the small space where his son sat in the waitress's arms. He noticed every movement. The way she tapped the boy's hand lightly when he grabbed her necklace. The way she tilted her head to meet his eyes. The way she giggled softly when he drooled on her shoulder, but didn't seem to mind at all. The father leaned back in his seat, observing quietly. He had seen thousands of people in his life, from world leaders to corporate giants. He had seen ambition, greed, fear, and respect. But what he saw now was rare, pure kindness, without expecting anything in return. For years, he had lived in a mansion filled with silence. Nurses and caretakers had come and gone, professionals with degrees and skills, but none had brought out this light in his son. His boy had always remained quiet, withdrawn, smiling only occasionally. Yet now, in the arms of a simple waitress, his son's laughter filled the air, turning heads from nearby tables. People noticed, some even smiled, and the father realized how different it felt to have others see his son happy instead of pitiful. The waitress eventually placed the boy back into his wheelchair with the same care she had lifted him. She adjusted his blanket, making sure he was comfortable, and brushed his hair gently out of his face. Then she looked at the father and gave him a smile so natural, so free of judgment, that it unsettled him. People usually looked at him with admiration, envy, or fear. Rarely had anyone looked at him with such simple human warmth. "Your son is wonderful," she said softly, her eyes bright. "He has such a beautiful laugh." The father opened his mouth but found no words. Praise for his son was rare. Most people only saw the disability, the limitations, the challenges. But this woman saw his child, truly saw him. The billionaire cleared his throat, nodding slightly. His emotions too tangled to speak aloud. As she walked away to serve another table, the father's gaze followed her. Something inside him was unsettled, a feeling he couldn't quite explain. He had built skyscrapers, closed billion-dollar deals, and outsmarted rivals. Yet here, in this small diner, watching his son's joy in the hands of a stranger, he felt like a student, Learning something new about life, the boy tapped his father's arm with a small, clumsy hand, as if to remind him that he was still there. The father leaned down and kissed his forehead, his heart heavy and light all at once. He wanted to ask himself why his son laughed more with her than with him. Was it because she had no fear, no barriers? Was it because she treated him like any other child, not like a fragile burden? The questions swirled in his mind, but deep down he already knew the answer. She carried something he had lost long ago, the ability to give love freely without expecting anything in return. The billionaire kept watching her as she moved around the diner. She balanced plates, refilled coffee cups, joked with other customers, and yet, every time she passed by their table, she leaned down to smile at his son. It wasn't forced. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't even aware that the man before her was one of the richest in the country. To her, he was just a father, and his son was just a little boy who deserved to be happy. The father stayed longer than he planned. Normally, he hated waiting, hated wasting time. His days were scheduled to the second. But today he found himself slowing down, drinking his cold coffee without noticing, just to watch the small miracles happening in front of him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a powerful businessman. He felt like a father searching for hope, and somehow, this ordinary woman had handed it to him without even knowing. As he rose to leave, he glanced one last time at the waitress. She was laughing with another customer, wiping her hands on her apron, unaware of the impact she had just made. The boy in the wheelchair smiled, his small hands clapping together in delight. And the father realized this simple morning had shifted something inside him forever. The billionaire returned to the diner again the next week. It wasn't something he normally did. He was a man of routine, his time managed by assistants and calendars. But now, his schedule was quietly bending around a new habit. He found himself driving his son to that same small diner more often, always hoping to see the waitress who had made such a difference that first day. His son seemed to sense it too. The boy's face lit up each time they approached the diner, as though he knew who was waiting inside. For a child who had spent so many days withdrawn and silent, this excitement was something the father could not ignore. It was enough to make him change his own habits. Even if it felt strange for a man of his wealth to sit in such an ordinary place when they walked in. The waitress greeted them with the same bright smile, her eyes lighting up the moment she saw the boy. She bent down, as always, speaking directly to him, calling him buddy and asking what adventure he wanted today, pancakes with syrup or maybe scrambled eggs. The father sat quietly, watching once again as his son's face broke into laughter and shy giggles at her silly questions. Over the next few visits, the father found himself observing more closely. He noticed how she never rushed when it came to his son. Even if the diner was crowded and other tables were waiting, she always knelt down for a moment, giving the boy her full attention. She made silly drawings on his napkin, folded straws into little shapes, and taught him how to tap the table like it was a drum. His son responded each time, smiling wider, trying harder to use his hands and voice. These small changes were things no doctor had managed to achieve, and yet this waitress did it with nothing more than kindness. Slowly, the father began speaking with her too. At first, it was just polite conversation, asking about the menu or how long she had worked there. But as the weeks passed, he listened more deeply. He learned that she lived in a small apartment nearby, sharing it with her younger sister, whom she was raising on her own after their parents passed away. She worked double shifts to pay rent and school fees, often coming in tired, but never showing it to her customers. Her dreams had once been larger, but life's responsibilities had forced her to put them aside. The billionaire listened quietly, something he rarely did with anyone. In boardrooms, he was the one giving orders, the one everyone tried to please. But here, he was simply a man listening to a young woman tell her story. He was struck by how different her world was from his. No wealth, no security, just endless struggle. And yet, despite her hardships, she carried herself with grace. Smiling through long days and giving joy to strangers, he found himself admiring her. Not in the way men often admired women, but in a deeper sense. He admired her strength, her compassion, her refusal to let life's difficulties harden her heart. He thought about his own life, how money had given him everything but peace, how he had walls of luxury around him, yet often felt trapped inside. This waitress, with nothing but her courage and kindness, seemed freer than he had ever been. Each time he visited, he noticed how his son grew more attached to her. The boy reached out his arms when she walked by, his face lighting up in ways the father hadn't seen before. When she held him, he tried to speak, forming small sounds that almost became words. Once, he even managed to say a broken hi, and the waitress clapped her hands in delight, as though it were the greatest thing she had ever heard. The father sat frozen, overwhelmed with emotion. His son had struggled for years to form words, yet this woman had unlocked something in him without even trying. The connection between the three of them deepened in quiet, unspoken ways. The waitress never treated them differently because of who he was. In fact, she didn't even seem to realize he was one of the wealthiest men in the city. To her, he was just a father, tired and a little distant, who clearly loved his son but struggled to reach him. She treated him with the same warmth she gave every other customer. No fear, no false respect. This, more than anything, made him feel seen as a human being rather than a title. The father began noticing small details he had once overlooked in life. The way his son's fingers tapped happily on the table when she came near, the way his eyes followed her as she moved around the diner, the way laughter came so easily in her presence. These were moments he treasured even more than any business success he had ever achieved. One afternoon, after another visit filled with laughter and play, the father found himself asking her more personal questions. Did she ever wish for something else in life? Did she ever feel that her hard work was unnoticed? She shrugged lightly, saying she sometimes dreamed of doing more, but for now, her sister's happiness was all that mattered. The billionaire was silent for a long moment, realizing how different her priorities were from the endless chase for money and power he had always known. When they left that day, the boy looked back at the diner, his small hands waving toward the waitress. She waved back, calling out, "See you soon, buddy." The boy's face shone with joy, and the father's heart ached in a way he hadn't felt before. He realized that this simple connection, born in a modest diner, was changing not only his son's life, but his own. He drove home slowly, his mind heavy with thoughts. He had always believed that money could solve everything. Yet here was proof that money couldn't buy what mattered most. His son's laughter, his progress, his joy, all had come not from wealth, but from a woman who gave her heart freely. The billionaire couldn't stop thinking about her. Each night, as he sat in his grand mansion surrounded by silence, her smile came back to him. Her kindness echoed in his mind. And above all, the image of his son's joy burned brightly in his heart, reminding him that something extraordinary had entered their lives. The evening was quiet when the billionaire sat in his office, the large windows showing the city lights glittering below. Normally, this view gave him pride. He had built much of that skyline, turning his company into a giant, admired and feared by many. But tonight, the lights felt cold, and the silence of the huge room weighed heavily on him. His son was asleep upstairs, and though he was surrounded by every luxury a man could want, his heart felt restless. He could not stop thinking of the diner, of the waitress, and of the moments of laughter his son had shared with her. He replayed the memory of the boy giggling in her arms, the way his eyes lit up whenever she entered the room, and the way she looked at him, not as a disabled child, but as a child full of possibility. For years, therapists and caretakers had worked with his son, but none had sparked such joy. None had unlocked his laughter so easily. It made him think about the difference between skill and love. Doctors could heal the body, but what about the soul? This woman, with no training, had healed something inside his son just by caring. The father knew he had to make a choice. His life had been built on decisions fast, bold, often risky, but this decision felt different. This was not about money or power, but about his son's happiness and his own heart as a father. That night, he made up his mind. He would not let this connection fade. He would ask her to be part of their lives, not just as a waitress they visited occasionally, but as someone who could care for his son every day, the next morning. He dressed more simply than usual, leaving behind the expensive suits that announced his wealth. He wanted her to see him as a father, not as a billionaire. He drove with his son to the diner, his heart beating faster than it ever did before a business deal. He rehearsed his words in his head but still felt unsure. How could he ask such a thing of her? Would she think he was trying to buy her life? When they arrived, the boy immediately brightened, clapping his hands as the waitress came over. She knelt down as always, greeting him with warmth and laughter. The father watched, his decision growing stronger with every smile his son gave. Finally, when she placed their food on the table, he cleared his throat. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly, his voice softer than she had ever heard. She looked at him curiously, wiping her hands on her apron. "Of course," she said. He hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "You've made a difference in my son's life, more than anyone else ever has. He laughs with you. He speaks more. He feels alive. I cannot ignore that. I want to ask you something unusual." Her brows lifted slightly, but she remained silent, waiting. "I would like you to become part of his life," he continued. "Not just here in the diner, but every day. I can provide you with stability, a good income, a safe home. But more than that, I want you to help him grow, to care for him the way you already do, with love." The waitress blinked, surprised by the offer. She glanced at the boy who was grinning at her, tugging at her sleeve as though asking her not to leave his side. Her heart softened, but hesitation filled her eyes. "That's a big thing to ask," she said slowly. "I have my sister, I have responsibilities, and this is my job. I can't just leave it all behind." The billionaire leaned forward, his tone earnest. "I'm not asking out of charity. You've given him something priceless, Joy. I cannot buy that with money. I can only ask you as a father to consider this. I'll make sure your sister's cared for. Your future is secure. I don't want to take away your life. I want to make it better, for you and for him." She looked at him carefully, trying to understand his sincerity. She had met many wealthy men before, customers who treated her like she was invisible. But this man spoke not like a billionaire, but like a desperate father searching for hope. And when she looked at the boy, his eyes shining with trust and love, she felt her own hesitation begin to melt. Still, doubt tugged at her. What if I can't do it? I'm not trained. I'm not a nurse or a teacher. I'm just... She paused, lowering her voice. "I'm just a waitress." The father shook his head. "You are not just anything. You've done what no professional could. You've reached his heart. That matters more than any degree. Training can be given, but love cannot. You already have what he needs most." For a long moment, the waitress sat in silence, her heart torn. She thought about her sister, about their small apartment, about the constant struggle to make ends meet. She thought about the boy in front of her, the way he laughed and reached for her as though she were already part of his world. And she thought about the man across the table, whose eyes carried both power and vulnerability, a strange mix she had never seen before. Finally, she nodded slowly. "If you're sure this is what you want, then yes, I'll do it." The boy clapped his hands as though he understood, his laughter ringing through the diner. The father closed his eyes briefly, relief washing over him. It felt like a weight had lifted from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he believed his son's future could be brighter, filled with love and possibility. Over the next few days, arrangements were made. The waitress left her job at the diner, though not without sadness. Her coworkers hugged her, wishing her well, and she promised to visit. The billionaire ensured her sister was enrolled in a good school and provided them with a comfortable home. At first, it all felt overwhelming, going from long shifts and small paychecks to a life of stability. But when she looked at the boy's smiling face each morning, she knew she had made the right choice. The father watched everything unfold with quiet gratitude. He had given her an opportunity, but in truth, she had given him and his son far more. Each evening, when he saw his boy laughing in her arms, practicing new words, or learning small tasks, his heart filled with pride and hope. He realized this was not just about care, it was about love, and how love could transform even the heaviest burdens into joy. The decision he had made that day in the diner became the turning point of all their lives. A father who once believed only in wealth discovered the true value of kindness. A waitress who once struggled to survive found a new purpose in a family. And a boy who had once lived in silence now filled his days with laughter, because someone had finally seen him for who he truly was. The months that followed brought changes that no one could have imagined. The billionaire's mansion. Once silent and filled only with the sound of ticking clocks and distant footsteps of staff, now echoed with laughter. His son, who had once spent most days quietly sitting in his wheelchair, began to show a brightness that warmed everyone around him. The waitress, who had stepped into their lives so unexpectedly, had now become the heart of the home. Every morning, she arrived in the boy's room with a cheerful greeting. Opening the curtains to let in the sunlight, she spoke to him as though every word mattered, encouraging him to respond in small ways. Sometimes he would clap, sometimes he would giggle, and on the best mornings, he would try to say simple words. The father often stood quietly at the door, watching with awe. Each small victory felt like a miracle, and he knew deep down that it was her presence that had made the difference. She treated the boy as if he were her own child, not with pity, but with love and patience. She sang songs while feeding him, told him stories while helping him practice small movements, and never once grew frustrated when progress was slow. She celebrated every little step forward, clapping her hands and laughing with him as though each moment was a great triumph. And in those moments, the boy blossomed. His eyes no longer carried the sadness they once held. Instead, they shone with life, with joy, with hope. The billionaire, who had always been distant and cold, began to change too. He found himself spending more time at home, drawn to the warmth that now filled the house. He joined them during playtime, awkward at first, not knowing how to let go of his stiffness. But the waitress encouraged him gently, showing him how to laugh freely with his son, how to hold him in a way that made him feel secure. Slowly, the walls he had built around his heart began to crumble. He started smiling more, even laughing. Something his employees and colleagues would never have believed possible. One evening, as they sat in the garden, the boy resting happily on a blanket surrounded by toys, the father turned to the waitress. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "You've changed everything," he admitted. "I thought I could give my son the world with my money, but I was wrong. What he needed wasn't riches. He needed love, and you gave that to him." She smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "He already had love," she said. "From you? Maybe you didn't know how to show it, but it was always there. He just needed someone to bring it out." The father looked at her for a long moment, his heart heavy with emotions he couldn't quite name. For years he had measured life in numbers, profits, losses, investments. But sitting there, watching his son giggle as he played, he realized the true wealth of life was something entirely different. It was not the towers he built, but the moments of joy he now shared with his child. The waitress herself found her life transformed in ways she had never expected. No longer did she wake up to the stress of unpaid bills and endless shifts. Her sister thrived in her new school, their lives now steady and secure. But more than material comfort, she had found something far greater: purpose. She was no longer just surviving. She was making a real difference in someone's life. The boy's laughter, his small progress, his trust in her. These were rewards far greater than any paycheck. The bond between her and the boy deepened with each passing day. He reached for her whenever he saw her, his face lighting up in a way that melted the hearts of everyone around. When he struggled to form new words, it was her name he tried first, his broken syllables carrying more meaning than perfect speech ever could. For him, she had become more than a caregiver. She was a friend, a teacher, and a source of endless comfort. The father noticed this bond and felt no jealousy, only gratitude. For years, he had been unable to give his son what she had given so naturally. Instead of resenting it, he embraced it, learning from her, watching her, and slowly finding his own way to connect with his child. Their home was no longer a mansion of silence. It was alive, filled with warmth and laughter. There were still hard days, moments when the boy's condition reminded them of the challenges that lay ahead. But even in those moments, The waitress's calm presence kept them steady. She never allowed despair to take over. She reminded the father that progress was measured not in leaps, but in steps, and that every smile, every laugh, every word was worth celebrating. Over time, the billionaire realized that she had not just changed his son's life, she had changed his as well. He found himself looking at the world differently. The deals he once chased so urgently seemed less important. The power he once clung to felt empty compared to the simple joy of hearing his son laugh. He began to spend more evenings at home, more mornings at the breakfast table, more hours being not just a provider, but a father. One night, after tucking his son into bed, he stood with the waitress at the doorway, watching the boy sleep peacefully. His small chest rose and fell in rhythm, his lips curved into a faint smile, even in dreams. The billionaire whispered softly, "I used to think I had everything. But until now, I never really had anything at all." She looked at him, her eyes gentle, and for the first time he allowed himself to feel something deeper, a sense of connection, of family, of love that went beyond wealth and success. He realized that this woman, once just a stranger in a diner, had given him back his humanity. As the days turned into months, the boy's progress continued. He spoke more words, laughed more often, and even tried small steps with help. The mansion that had once felt like a lonely fortress now felt like a home. Staff members noticed the change too, whispering about how their employer, once so distant and cold, now smiled more, greeted them kindly, and seemed lighter. For the waitress, her life had shifted from struggle to fulfillment. She no longer worried about tomorrow. Instead, she lived each day with purpose, pouring her heart into caring for the boy who had become like family to her. And in return, she received love not only from him, but also from his father, who had opened his heart in ways he never thought possible. The story that began with a simple act of kindness in a diner had turned into something far greater. A waitress who once felt invisible discovered her true worth. A billionaire who once lived only for wealth discovered the value of love. And a little boy, once trapped in silence, discovered laughter, joy, and the warmth of a family that truly saw him. Their lives were forever changed, not by money, not by power, but by the simple act of one woman kneeling down in a diner, holding a child and seeing him not as disabled, but as beautiful.